Welcome to this episode of the Tactical Business Podcast. I am your host, Wade Skalsky, and today I'll be speaking with Michael Schwartz of San Diego County Gun Owners. Michael, how are you doing today, sir?
Good, Wade. Thanks for having me on.
I'm excited to have a fellow podcaster on. I know you have your own podcast. We'll talk about that as well. And I'm also excited to have someone from California on because I used to live in LA and I'm very familiar with sort of the at least when I lived there, the gun environment there. So I'm happy and excited to talk about that today to someone who's actually doing something about that. So let's talk a little bit about your kind of like your origin story. Like, how did you get to where you are now in terms of working, with San Diego County Gun Owners, your podcast? Like, I'm assuming you didn't come out of the womb ready to fight for gun rights. So how did you get here?
No, it was a few months after the womb.
Got
It took me. I had to get acclimated to the world. But no, what happened was back in 2007, the end of 2007. I was recently married at the time, and I was into guns. I was always into guns. Growing up, watching movies in the 80s. I was always just kind of had an interest in guns. It was very interesting to me. The idea that you can take, a couple of ounces of lead and accurately place it 1,000 yards away. Like, it was just really fascinating. It was fun when you're a kid and everything, but then, the physics of it and the practicality of it, that started getting really interesting to me. So when I was, I guess when I turned 21, I went and bought a Glock and a Mossberg 500 shotgun and an AR. And at the time, I was actually more interested in an AK because I grew up a huge Red Dawn fan, so I wanted an AK. But they talked me into getting an AR, and I'm actually very glad they did that. That was late 90s, right before the assault weapons ban in California really expanded. But I wasn't all that interested in the politics of it. And I didn't really get interested in the politics of it until the politics of it got interested in me. And that is so many people's story. And I do spend a lot of time trying to convince people that, hey, you have to get interested in the politics of this stuff before it lands on your head. Don't wait until, something happens to you. And what happened to me was, like I said, 2007, I was recently married. We were with another couple. We were out in the desert on federal land, and we were camping and off-roading and shooting, having fun. And my wife and her friend took my Jeep, for a little drive off-roading, and I took all my guns out of my Jeep and laid them on a tarp on the ground. And a Bureau of Land Management law enforcement officer came up and said, he said, I'm going to have a look around. And he just started looking around our campsite. And I had all my guns laying out on this tarp, and which thought was fine. And he grabbed my Mossberg 500 and he said, whose is this? And I said, well, that's mine. And he said, well, it's illegal. And I said, I don't know why. And he started to tell me that it violated California's assault weapons ban. And I was baffled because anybody that knows a shotgun or a Mossberg shotgun, it's a pump action shotgun. It's the least fancy firearm you can probably buy, And he said, well, where did you buy it? And I said, I bought it at Discount Gun Mart in San Diego. And he said, not in that configuration. You didn't. Well, my shotgun had just a pistol grip. It didn't have a full stock on it, which I thought looked cool at the time. Totally impractical, but, it looked cool, right? So I said, no, that's exactly how I bought it. That's the configuration I bought it. Anyway, we went back and forth, and I made a point to be very respectful and very, professional and not antagonistic, not, a jerk. And I started leading him down a path of saying yes. And, I'd ask him questions like, I said, well, the barrel is 18 and a quarter inches, which is a quarter inch over the minimum, right? Yeah, yeah. And I started getting him to say yes to some of these questions about the particulars of the shotgun. And finally I said, and the overall length is 31 inches, which is 1 inch over the legal minimum, right? And he said, yes. And I said, no, for shotguns, it's 26 inches. And I kind of we went a little bit further. I kind of proved to him that he didn't really understand the law that he was trying to enforce. And when I say he was trying to enforce, this guy had cuffs out. He was ready to arrest me. So he said, "Give me your ID." Finally, he said, "Give me your ID and I'll run the numbers on the shotgun. If it's not stolen, you can have it back." So I kind of followed him to his car, I gave him my ID, and I kept talking to him, in a very friendly manner. And I found out that not only did he not understand the law that he was trying to enforce, he didn't agree with the law that he was trying to enforce, and that he was a hobbyist too. He loved guns. He was a gun enthusiast, and he used to bring his friends to that exact piece of desert to shoot. And the idea that he was ready to arrest me, over a law that he didn't agree with or understand, but he was ready to arrest me in front of my new wife and friends out in the desert, not hurting anybody. It really truly affected me. And it bummed me out. It kind of really got to me. And I thought, man, all this guy needed in order to completely throw his principles out the window was a government paycheck. That's all that guy needed. He was ready to completely ruin my life over a government paycheck. So the folks I was with were kind of happy, right? They're like, woohoo, nothing bad happened. And when I went back to work the next Monday and I told some folks and some friends what happened, they kind of had this attitude like, well, what were you doing out there shooting? And those reactions bummed me out. And I thought, you know what? Something has to change. I'm not wrong. What I'm doing is not unusual or dangerous or bad. The fact that people don't know their rights and they aren't involved in something as important as gun ownership, that's wrong and bad. So I got really involved. The next month, since this was January 2018, I went to an NRA meeting, and February of 2008. That was January of 2008. I went to an NRA meeting. And then February of 2008, I got voted vice president of the NRA Members Council here in San Diego. And we grew it. There's about 6 people in the room, when I went. And I helped grow it. We all helped grow it. And eventually we'd have a few dozen people coming to meetings. And we're actually raising money and signing up members and teaching people how to shoot and doing the things it took to, change culture. And I got really heavily involved in some local campaigns here in San Diego. A guy was running for Congress, another guy was running for sheriff, another guy was running for city council, and I just dove in and said, "What do I do? How can I help?" I ended up throwing a fundraiser. It was a wine tasting fundraiser in my living room of my brand new house. It found out fundraising's not that complicated. It's not like it doesn't have to be like what you see in the movies where it's a $10,000 a plate, fancy, whatever. Made a bunch of mistakes, did a bunch of things right, learned from the mistakes, and refined the things that we did right, and eventually walked away from everything about 3 times. So this is ridiculous. I can't do this anymore. I'm spending too much volunteer time and nobody cares. And, you get frustrated and kind of wish that things were going faster, and got involved in the local Republican Party. And they weren't doing what I thought they should do when it came to Second Amendment. So finally in 2015, I walked away from my career in banking and, went back to all the people who I'd met through Second Amendment advocacy. By that time I'd been involved about 7 years, and said, "Hey, we're going to start our own organization." I looked around San Diego and said, "Okay, these are all the organizations that are having an impact. They're getting people elected. They're making decisions. None of them care about the Second Amendment, but what do they have in common that makes them effective?" And I took that criteria. I took those pieces of those other organizations, and I built San Diego County Gun Owners, and just focused on Second Amendment.
Mm.
Where all those other organizations were, honestly, if you boil it down, all of them were focused on tax policy. The Republican Party, the Lincoln Club, which is a pro-business club, the New Majority, which they were a right of center organization that didn't really focus on social issues, as they put it. unions on the left, all they were focused on were tax policy. And a lot of them would kind of placate, Second Amendment. Oh yeah, gee golly, yeah, sure, it's important, but not this election cycle. This election cycle, we're gonna concentrate on taxes, and then 2 years later, yeah, no, Second Amendment's important, but not this election cycle. This election cycle, it's immigration because that affects our taxes. And so I decided, all right, we need to make this, we need to emphasize Second Amendment. It can't be people's fifth or sixth or even their second priority. We need to find a group of people who realize that this is their first priority politically. And we need to raise a bunch of money, and we need to organize a bunch of people, and we need to have a full-time employee working on this around the clock. And that's how we're going to get attention on Second Amendment issues. And that was, like I said, we launched in the end of 2015, and we're going into our 10th year, and we have a lot of victories under our belt. It's worked out really, really well. So so we've won more than we've lost. We've grown tremendously, and the reality is more people own a gun, more people carry a gun, more people train with guns, more people run for office because of guns, more people are elected because of guns, thanks to San Diego County gun owners. And, we have a lot of individual specific victories, but the trajectory is going really, really great.
There's a lot to unpack there. What a great story. I think one thing that's really important for anyone listening to understand is that you can just do things, right? So, you didn't, you were in banking, you were, you had an experience and you're like, well, okay, well, I'm just going to do this, right? And it doesn't, if people have the desire to do something, be it open a gun store or be it to get involved in two-way politics, you can do that. It's not like the movies where there's this perception where there's all these obstacles that are in your way. And so that's great. What a
It,
great.
it, it's not. That's a really excellent point too. Let me just comment on that real quick. One thing I try to do, like last week, I actually gave a talk to an NRA members council up in South LA, and they're wonderful. And NRA is they have this kind of NRA 2.0 where some of the issues they've had over the last 5 years are behind them, and they're moving forward. And I'm a big supporter of that. I think it's great. But one of the things I really tried to get across in my talk, and I try to get across to people, is exactly what you just said. There's nothing special about me. There's nothing extraordinary about me that allowed, this all to happen. I don't have I'm not an attorney. I don't even have a college degree. I'm not, you know, wealthy. I'm not, rich. I didn't come from a rich family. I didn't have a connection or anything. I just decided that something needed to get done, and I started showing up and rolling up my sleeves and doing the things that needed to get done. I think it's human nature to, when you hear a story about someone who's successful at something, I think it's human nature to kind of go, well, but that person had this as their advantage, and I don't have that, so I can't do that. And and I really invite people to get rid of the excuses. Maybe someone does have an advantage you don't have, but that doesn't mean you can't accomplish what you need to accomplish. So just showing up, doing the work, rolling up your sleeves, getting other people to show up with you, good things will happen. I like to say that history is made by those who show up.
Yeah, and if you have the right message, people will be attracted. People will give you a lot of grace, and they'll give you a lot of wiggle room in terms of what you're trying to accomplish if you have the right message. And the two-way message, I think, resonates with a lot of people, especially and so for California, is like I said, my wife and I, our family used to live there, and watching that state, what's happening to it. I think there people are starting to open their minds that maybe there is a different way to do things now than the way that they used to be done. Are you seeing a shift sort of in the general population now from maybe where they were 5, 10 years ago in terms of being more open to some more conservative ideas, some more two-way ideas?
I don't know about more conservative ideas or anything, and and when I say I don't know about it, I really don't know about it. I'm laser focused on Second Amendment.
Hmm.
I definitely see a lot more or a lot broader support for the idea of carrying, a firearm for self protection outside of the home. I definitely see. men and women, old and young, left and right, all kinds of different people who aren't historically thought of as pro Second Amendment. I definitely see a big shift. I mean, even I got to tell you, in 2008, when I started, or 2000, yeah, about 2008 when I started, there was still kind of this leftover idea that guns equal hunting.
Hmm.
The idea of carrying a pistol for self-defense was still kind of foreign, even to people that were really passionate about guns. That it's even though it really CCWs and carrying, daily, that really started in about 1990 when Florida started issuing. And, that idea that, hey, people need to carry for self-defense, that a gun is the most effective self-defense tool ever invented. People are definitely warming up to that like I've never seen, and I'm going to say in about the last 10 years or so. I mean, it really has gone mainstream. Men, women, you name it, old and young are definitely comfortable, a lot more comfortable with the idea of carrying a firearm outside of your home, concealed by a trained, sane, law-abiding gun owner for self-defense. They're far more comfortable with that than they ever have been.
Well, and I think the part of that has been some of the movement with regards to the law, because when I was a lawyer in California, people would come to me and they say, "Hey, can you help me get a concealed carry permit, right, in Los Angeles or Orange County or whatever?" And I was like, I mean, no, I can't.
No.
They're not issuing. I think the stats were they were like six that were issued or something. And then I had a couple of guys towards right before I left, and they're like, "Okay, well, let's try," right? And they were medical professionals where they carried a lot of cash and a lot of controlled substances for these medical experiments or whatever that they did. And we I got them two concealed permits, and this is before the law changed. But we had to file like these briefs that were like 120 pages each, right? And so
Jeez.
that puts it that kind of regulation puts it out of reach for like the normal human beings. Nobody's going to do that, right? And
Yeah.
so the change of the law, though, to where now it's like you're actually starting to get it, issued in Los Angeles or in Orange County more now. Has that change kind of helped the cause a little bit as well, where it's kind of opening people's minds just so they could just go do it now or have at least a chance to go do it?
Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting. So the change in the law you're talking about brewing
Hmm.
from what I guess it's been about 2 years now.
Hmm.
And before that, we started in 2015. And by 2017, by the summer of 2017, you could get a permit in San Diego.
Mm.
In fact, most people, if you could pass the background check and take the class, pay the fee or whatever, you could get a permit in San Diego. There was still a good cause requirement, meaning you had to write a good cause statement. But what happened was we started emphasizing CCWs and how the sheriff could issue if the sheriff chose to issue. That the state gave, the sheriff enough latitude to pick their own good cause, criteria. So we put what I call political pressure on the sheriff. And what we didn't insult him. We didn't make fun of him. We didn't call him names. We didn't march or protest. We didn't do any of those things. What we did do is we worked within the system. So we went to people that endorsed him and said, hey, don't endorse him until he changes his CCW policy. Don't endorse him. We went to donors and said, don't donate to him, because of his CCW policy. We'd have people show up where he was given a talk, and they'd wait their turn and ask the question in front of everybody. Hey, how come you don't trust us to defend ourselves when we're outside of the home? One time we had a single mom holding her baby on her hip, and she went up to the microphone after he gave a talk, and she asked him, how come you don't trust me to protect myself and my baby when I'm outside of the home? And he would, gee golly gosh, and well, gee, I don't know, and hem haw and whatever. And this was, by the way, he won in court in the Peruta case. He actually won. The sheriff won. The Ninth Circuit didn't compel him to issue. In fact, they said, no, you don't have to issue. Your good cause policy can be whatever you want. They basically said the people in the Ninth Circuit do not have the right to concealed carry. They don't have a right to a CCW. So he won. So even after he won, this political pressure got him to change his policy. And I think the most effective thing we did is we went to the city of Santee, which is a city here in San Diego, about, I don't know, maybe 50, 60,000 people. And they contract with them. They pay, at the time, paid them about $17 million a year to be their police force. They don't have their own PD. They hired the sheriff to be their police force. And we got them to pass a resolution that said, hey, we pay you X amount of money every year to be our police force. We disagree with your CCW policy. Please change.
Hmm.
And it passed 5-0. And everybody asked, okay, well, what now? And I said, well, I don't know. There are 18 cities in San Diego. We're going to see how many of them will pass this thing. Well, I didn't actually have to wait that long. The Union Tribune did a piece on it. One of the city council members had already done an op-ed on how he disagreed with the CCW policy. And the next week he called me, the sheriff called me and said, okay, let's sit down and talk about this. And we spent the summer of 2017 figuring out what his good cause policy could be, that would include basically everybody. And we immediately started having seminars. We were teaching 4 or 5 seminars a month on how to write your good cause statement. And there were about 1,100 CCWs in San Diego issued. And San Diego's got maybe just under 3.5 million people. So only 1,100 people had their CCW. And here we are, less than 10 years later, 8 years later, and post Bruin, and we're at over 24,000 CCWs issued. And there's something like 5,000 people waiting for their CCW to be issued. They're going through the process. So years before Bruin, we were getting people their CCW, and that was very motivating to people. Bruin happened, and then it got even more widespread. They didn't even have to write a good cause statement. They could just go get their permit. And it's interesting because you were asking, hey, has that changed? I think it's definitely changed. It's continuing to change the culture and the idea. Like I said, far more people are comfortable with the idea of carrying, but it's also created a little bit of apathy. There's a lot of people their whole thing was they just wanted to carry. They needed to carry. They wanted to be safe outside of the home. They don't need a shotgun. They don't need a rifle. They're probably not going to go to the range every weekend. It's not really their hobby, but they want to be able to protect themselves and their family and their loved ones. Once that problem is solved, they kind of drop out of, the passion of trying to solve a problem. So it's actually, I think, yeah, it's created some long-term interest. People have gotten into it who maybe never would have before, and that's good, but it's also created some apathy.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think there's 2 points I want to talk about on that. The first and the most important one, I think, is there's this really nice um, bookends for those stories from your first experience with that federal officer on the land, where you're like, I didn't berate him, I didn't yell at him, I was calm, and I just explained to him, with the law itself, and then also just my general demeanor was, I was like, look, let's collaborate on this. Let's not be adverse to each other, right? And then to the way that you handle the sheriff situation, where you're like, all right, well, I'm going to work within the system. I'm not going to call this guy out. I'm not going to be. You don't want to. It's very easy to make you appear to be a zealot in this space if you're unwilling to work with anyone, right? It's like you can't be my way or the highway. You have to be like, we have to work within the constraints that we have, or else it's very easy to get marginalized. And that is it's not the only strategy, but that is a very successful strategy that you deployed twice, right? And probably more with regards to your organization itself. So I think that's a really important point for people to take from that. It's like, look, it's like you have to be able to be a collaborator with everyone, and eventually they will collaborate with you.
Hopefully. And I tell people, yeah, there are people that are just lost. They're never
Mhm.
going to agree with us no matter what. And okay, that's fine. But I tell people in general, if you're treating candidates or elected officials better or worse than the way you would treat an underperforming employee, you're probably making a mistake.
Hmm.
If you treat them like a superstar, then they don't have to earn anything from you. They think that they got you in their back pocket. On the other hand, if you treat somebody, you yell at them and insult them and whatever, then they're not even going to try. They're not going to try to come to your position at all. But if you treat them the same way you would treat an underperforming employee, somebody who isn't bad enough to fire yet, but they're certainly not good enough to promote, you just kind of, well, gee, it's kind of disappointing. And I sure would enjoy, like it if you did this, but I don't know. It doesn't seem like you're able to do that kind of thing. You kind of treat them like an underperforming employee who you don't care if they quit or whatever. That seems to be the way to treat
Mm.
candidates and elected officials.
That's a really good heuristic. I'm gonna steal that from you. I'll give you credit for it like 2 times, and then it's something I'll
And then
feel
it's
smart.
yours.
Then
You got it.
then I'll appear super smart in that situation.
Take it.
And that's a good talk. Good way to talk about like the vision that you have. So, obviously the idea of preserving two-way rights is a general concept, right? It's like a 35,000 foot view. What are some of the tangible things that you're working on right now that you think are important for San Diego gun owners that are beyond we got the EDC thing taken care of. So now what are some of the tangible things that you're working on?
Yeah. So now what, right? Well, it's a good question. And the reality is we didn't invent San Diego County gun owners to solve the CCW problem.
Mhm.
That was just something that came up. And there's a lot of things that we've tackled and are doing that were never really a part of the original plan. The original plan was very simple. We were going to raise you only have two tools in politics, people and money. That's it. Your ideas, doesn't matter how good or bad they are. It doesn't matter, and none of it matters. All it matters is, do you have enough money and people to, get your policy across the finish line? So the plan was we're going to raise enough money and organize enough people to get elected on every single board and council in San Diego County. We're not really focused on state, although we do reflect who other organizations endorse on state level races, like CRPA, California Rifle and Pistol, Gun Owners of California, NRA, whoever they endorse on the state level. We reflect that on our voter guide. But our focus is that we vet and support city council members, school board members, county board of supervisors, sheriff, because those are the people who eventually run for higher office. And once you're in the system, once you've run for city council and won, um, it gives you such an enormous advantage when you want to run for higher office. And everybody, if you look at Sacramento and Washington, D.C., almost every one of them started out on a local board or council somewhere, or at least working for someone who was on a local board or council. So the idea of getting these people elected when it's much easier to elect a city council member than it is to elect someone in Congress. And there just was nobody focused on this. So we didn't want to do what was already being done. We're very happy with CRPA and NRA and GOC and GOA and FPC and all these other organizations. We love them. They're great. So we didn't start because we were being critical of other organizations. We started because we saw a need that wasn't being fulfilled. So that's why we named it San Diego County Gun Owners, because we're only focused on the boards and councils that are, within San Diego County. So our ongoing mission is to elect people who are pro Second Amendment onto the 18 city councils, there's a couple of dozen school boards, county board, et cetera. So that's always our primary mission. Now, aside from that, we do a number of things. Like when I started San Diego County Gun Owners, I would run into people that were 40 or 50 years old. They'd never touched a gun before. Well, if you're trying to tell somebody who's 40 years old how important guns are, and therefore they should become a member and get active and donate their time and donate their dollar, and they've never touched a gun before. I mean, so now we have at least twice a month, we have what we call shooting socials, where we pair experienced shooters up with brand new gun owners or brand new people who've never touched a gun before, or maybe they've only had, one or two experiences. And we give them a first time shooting experience. And in our 9+ years, we've had over 10,000 people in San Diego go through that program. So we're, trying to change the culture that way. We have a women's program that we call Not Me. If you are a woman and you want to defend yourself, contact us and we will help you buy a gun. We will help you get the training you're going to need now that you're a gun owner, and we'll help you get a permit. And we do that. The program is designed to stop or prevent sexual assault or domestic violence by making sure that any woman who wants to can defend herself. And if any piece of it is cost prohibitive, then we find a discount or a grant and we make sure that she can afford a gun, she can afford training, and she can afford her permit. And all the women who help these women are trained volunteers. So when they contact us and say, "Hey, I think I want to be a gun owner," then a woman reaches out to her and says, "Great, let's figure out what you need and how we're going to get it for you." And that program, it's very hands-on. It's not just information on a website. It's very hands-on, and that program, over 1,300, I think we might be up to over 1,400 women have gone through that program. So that's another big priority, and that helps change culture and starts to touch politics. There's some local ordinances. We're plaintiffs on a number of lawsuits, thanks to Firearms Policy Coalition, who's been absolutely wonderful to us. And some local ordinances having to do with storage, having to do with home manufacturing firearms, stuff like that. So those are the focuses: changing the local policy, cooperating with other organizations to change state and even federal policy, training people and getting them involved in shooting and self-defense, and then making sure that the right people get elected. That's all the bread and butter.
What I like about that is you have sort of a grassroots approach, which is, grassroots on the level of politics where you're kind of starting at that lower level. But then you also have like, a grassroots approach with just people in general, right? It's not just the politics. It's you're gonna get the populace and the politics. And I think if one thing that the 2000 early 2020s taught us is how important school boards are, right? And
Yeah.
those and some of those, because you never really notice a school board, or you never really notice other city councils or anything for the most part. But then when you had, these issues that started to come into, 2020 with all the medical stuff, and then now with all this other kind of craziness that's going on, those boards become extremely important.
They're important for two reasons. They drive messaging. The local papers and local news pay attention to what these school boards say and what they pass. So if they're passing some resolution that, hey, guns are horrible, people pay attention to that, and it becomes a part of, it becomes the narrative, but the other thing is a lot of people, like I said earlier, in Sacramento and Washington, D.C., a lot of them started out on a school board somewhere. A lot of people go get elected on a school board to cut their teeth so they can run for higher office. So,
Right.
those two reasons, school boards are extremely important.
Yeah, and I think there's so many things that you're talking about. What I love about it is that it's not something that is only that you can do, right? This is duplicatable and replicatable anywhere else in the country.
All it takes is passion. It takes passion, but I think, it is a heavy lift.
Mhm.
It takes passion, it takes a lot of time, and it takes dedicated people. I mean, I started it, but I started out with 28 board members, people that I, had been working with on this for years, and went to them and said, "Hey, I'm starting this organization. I need your leadership." So we started out with 28 board members. From there, it grew and grew. One of the mistakes I see with all kinds of different groups is you have like, half a dozen core members, and they think, all right, well, now we're going to go, enforce our will on the world. And six people can't really, that's not,
Mhm.
what those six people should be doing is focusing on turning into 12 people,
Mhm.
and then those 12 people need to turn into 24, and those 24 need to turn into 48. It really does take a lot of numbers, but again, both people and money to get something done. So a lot of the early focus, and still today, is on growth. We have over 4,000 members, which is great. But I think it should be 40,000, members. We estimate there are at least 400,000 gun owners in San Diego. Out of 3.5 million, it's probably even higher, but we figure that's a pretty comfortable number. And they should all be members. They should all be involved. So there's not a day doesn't go by that we don't do something to try to gather more people and get them involved.
Yeah, and that's the challenge is that keeping and sustaining that drive to grow and not becoming complacent. how do you do that? I mean, you've been doing this now for a while, right? And so you're not the same guy that got stopped in the desert. You've had a lot of success. How do you not just coast, Right? How do you keep
You-
that drive going?
So one of the things, so like I said, I looked at all the other political organizations and I looked at, hey, why are they successful? And the real influential, important political organizations that are making a difference, they have a full-time staffer. So you know, volunteers are wonderful. And there are a lot of things that volunteers can do, but volunteers, they have a real job that they got to go to, they have life, family, and whatever. The idea of getting a full-time employee whose job it is, their livelihood depends on, making this successful, I think it was crucial.
Mm,
And I'm that full-time employee in San Diego. But getting to the point where you can support a full-time employee who works on this 60 hours a week, wakes up, works on it till they go to sleep at night. That piece is important because you're right. Times get hard, things get frustrating, you start losing focus, and next thing you know, nothing's happened for a couple of months. But if you have a full-time employee, every single day, something is happening, something's getting organized, something's continuing. And if there are a lot of volunteers who were real passionate for a few years, and then they moved or they got involved in something else, or it just wasn't their passion anymore. But the full-time employee, they're still there. They stay. They continue the mission, and that's just a reality. And I think people right of center have this idea of it should be benevolent. You should just give. And yeah, in a perfect world, that is what should happen. But if you look on the left of the political spectrum, they've been comfortable with hiring full-time employees to work on, political and cultural things for decades, for decades. You see people in different, all kinds of different organizations that are generally left of center, and they'll have one, two, three, four employees working on something, and they're happy to raise money just to pay the employees to do the work it takes to be successful. And the right of center is coming around. They're starting to see that. But that's the cold hard reality. You got to have people paid to do this full time.
Yeah, and I think that's a great sort of North Star for if you have an organization and be like, okay, we need to shift our focus to getting that to happen, right? To really take things to the next level.
Yeah,
Um,
if you're those six people in the room that I'm talking about, and you're wondering like, well, how do we, what do we focus on here? What do we actually do or whatever? Rather than focusing on whatever the political issue of the day is, you should have a medium term plan that, hey, we want to raise enough money so that we can hire somebody to do this full time. Like that should be, a goal. And people it's hard to ask for money. It's hard to say, "Hey, we're going to pay somebody to do what a lot of volunteers have been doing." It's hard to kind of talk about that, but it needs to be a goal. That's how you're going to be effective.
Yeah, and I think, from another way like you're talking about too is the messaging, right? How, you get a full-time employee, the message that you're sending then to people is that you're legitimate, right? Like we're a legit organization. We have an employee or employees, and we're engaging in these things in terms of we're serious about what we're doing. And I think that signals then to the politicians maybe that you're trying to talk to get endorsements. Hey, these people aren't going to go away. We're not going to be able to outweight them because they're going to be there day in and day out.
Yep.
Talk to me a little bit about the podcast. How did that come to be? Kind of how does that fit into what you guys are doing now? What's the name of it? How do people find it? Like walk me through that and how that kind of all fits together.
Sure. So it's Gun Owners Radio, and you can find it on youtube.com/gun owners radio, or if you can just go to gunownersradio.com. We're on all the social media platforms. But I think our main push is through YouTube. And I can't remember really. I think San Diego County Gun Owners had existed for maybe 2 years. So somewhere around 2017 or so, one of the board members invited me to breakfast, introduced me to a guy who had a car show on the radio. His name's Dave Stahl, wonderful guy. The board member's name is Lance Pelkey, another wonderful guy. And they said, "Hey, we're thinking about doing a 1 hour radio show, and we'd like you to be a sponsor." And I said, I just don't have the money to be a sponsor right now. And they said, well, why don't you just sit in on the radio and, we'll talk about guns and see what happens. And that 1 hour show turned into a 2 hour show. It was on 1170 AM. And sitting in on it, it it turned into, something I focused on, and it turned into the ability to talk to people and get them on record. So if I sit down and talk to an elected official and they tell me something, then they can deny they ever said it. But if
Mhm.
I interview them on the radio, first off, telling them, "Hey, I'm going to interview you," they loved it. Especially this started, right before podcasting really took off. So their ability to get onto a show, they were real excited.
Mhm.
And then asking them the tough questions and having a conversation about things and getting them on record, that was super useful. I really enjoyed that. So eventually, we left the actual radio, 1170, and this was actually just about 6 months ago, and we went to just doing a straight podcast. I think people would be surprised at just how different a radio show is from a podcast, and how it's probably not surprising to learn that there are a lot of advantages to having a podcast as opposed to a radio show. And the reality is, I think that we were driving more people to the radio station than the radio station was driving to us.
Mm.
So we had built an audience, and we just took that audience with us to YouTube, and it's been great. We just went over 10,000 subscribers for the first time ever, and it's been wonderful. I've been able to structure it so that we get all the information out that people want to hear. They want to hear about lawsuits and bills and laws. They want to hear about, they want to hear some interesting interviews and stuff like that. We have one really cool segment. This has been going on for about 6 years. My sister called me and said, "Hey, I think he was 19. Your 19-year-old nephew is really good at gun trivia. He knows a lot about guns. So you should have him on the show and ask him a question."
Mm.
And I thought, well, everybody's mom thinks that they're amazing, right? Like how smart
Right.
could it be, right?
Right.
So we did, and he nailed it. He knocked it out of the park. So every week we have a segment called Stump My Nephew.
Mhm.
And if you write in and ask a question about guns or gun history or caliber or whatever, we ask him the question on the air. He doesn't get to prepare. He hears the question for the first time on the air, and then he either answers it or he's not able to. But you always get a real good lecture because the kid knows a lot about guns. He reads, studies, and he just knows a lot about guns. So we do stuff like that. So sometimes it's fun and funny. Sometimes it's informational. It's really great.
Yeah, I actually had a radio show in Los Angeles for on AM radio for a while, and the big difference that people don't understand is you have to pause for commercials, right? So
Yeah.
there's no it's really hard to have continuity or to discover things in conversations when you have to stop so much because you're like, okay, now we have to stop and we have to wait, and you know what I'm saying? There's not the flow that you have in the podcast.
Yes. Exactly right.
And you don't discover I mean, the one great thing about podcasts, what I always love is that I always discover something through the conversation that I didn't know when I started, right? And I think that process of discovery is limited in a format that's so structured. And so yeah, and it's amazing that there's no barrier, and to do there's a lot of barriers to entry to get a radio show. Anyone can do a podcast if they want to, and so I think that's a really cool component of the podcast.
Yeah, it's very merit based. If you're good and interesting and people want to listen to you, you're going to get listeners.
No one listened to my radio show. They didn't care they didn't care about Wade beyond the courtroom. It was like a law show, and I was just interviewing all my old law school buddies. It's horrible. It was not good. It was not good. Well, great. Well, listen, we're coming to kind of come up in our time right now.
Sure.
How do people find you on the podcast? Give that information, and then where can people go if they want to contact you, and the website for the San Diego County Governors.
Yeah, you can pretty much find everything, including, the PACs, San Diego County gun owners, Orange County gun owners, Inland Empire gun owners, including our women's organization, which is notmeca.org, notmeca.org. You can find all that if you go to gunownersradio.com,
Cool.
gunownersradio.com. You can find out how to listen to us. You can listen to us anywhere in the world. You can find out all the other things about us and the things that we're doing. It's all centralized at gunownersradio.com.
Amazing. And yeah, man, I really enjoyed talking with you today and just hearing your story about how, it's just, you just kind of got to be in your bonnet about it. And you're like, dude, I'm gonna go do something about it. And then here you are, 10 years later, a little longer, and they've had so much success. So kudos to you.
Thank you very much. It's truly been an honor, and it's been the most interesting. I've met the best people. It's been so fulfilling. The victories we've had have been amazing. The letdowns and failures have been few, and it really truly is. It's been amazing watching people get a vehicle to work on something they're passionate about, the Second Amendment. So it's really all the members who volunteer and make this thing work and believe in what we're doing. The first year or so, it was just me and a clipboard. I didn't have t-shirts or hats and I had a website and a clipboard and an idea. And people believed in that idea, and they continue to believe in what we're doing, and they've seen that what we're doing is effective. And it's very, very touching, and it's an honor that people appreciate us so much that they volunteer their time and they decide to make a donation to us.
If someone's listening to this in San Diego, or someone is listening to this in other parts of the country, and they maybe want to contact you directly to get some pointers about maybe doing it in their own area, or they're in San Diego joining the organization, what is the best way to contact you?
My email, michael@sdcgo.org.
Perfect.
But go through any of the way. I'm the easiest guy in the world to get a hold of. My
Okay, great.
phone number and email are all over the place. So even if you just go through gunownersradio.com,
Okay, cool.
you'll be able to get a hold of me. No
All
problem.
right, great. Yeah, I didn't know if that had an access to you. So amazing. GunOwnersRadio.com. Michael Schwartz, I'd love to have you on the show again, 6 months to a year, and hear about all the successes that you guys are sure going to have in the coming future.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate what you do.
Absolutely. Thank you.